Can everyone give me a thumbs up if you can? Okay, good. So first off, I want to give a shout out. The program I was involved in is through the Practice Peace Institute. They are located in Sonoma, California. You can see the website there, the dates that I was involved in the program. This is an annual event that they coordinate. The director, her name is Georgia Kelly. She has informed me that they are already planning another seminar for October of next year. So you can go to the website there, practicepeace.org, and get more information about that if you might be interested. So, okay, let me move these boxes around a little bit. So, of course, since I'm a geographer, I have to include a map, right? Um, I think it's important to situate Mondragon. It is in the Basque region of Spain. It's often referred to as the Basque Country. The population there is roughly 3.2 million people, and the official language is actually Basque, or Euskera. And about 35% of the population there speak Basque as their first language. And among younger folks, especially those between the age of, let's say, 6, 7, and 22 years old, roughly 90% of them are fluent in Basque. It's important, I think, also to point out that there's a long history of geopolitical conflict within the Basque region. Really, since the 1960s, there has been a very strong separatist movement there to essentially secede from Spain. Many Basque people would like to see the Basque region as an independent nation state. For many decades, beginning in the 1960s, there was a separatist terrorist organization called ETA. If you have heard anything about the conflict in Northern Ireland, you've probably heard of the IRA. So ETA is sort of like the Basque version of the IRA. I think it's also important to point out, especially since we're going to talk about co-ops here, is that this geopolitical division also created sort of division among the Basque people. So you had a segment of the Basque people who were very much supportive of armed resistance and would see ETA as sort of like freedom fighters and not terrorists. And then you have a segment of the Basque population who were very much against the pro-independence, but against the violence against the Spanish state. Most people today in the Basque region, when you ask them what their identity is, they will say, I am first Basque, I am second European, and thirdly, I am Spanish, right? So important to put that, I think, in this sort of geopolitical context, because even in the midst of all of this sort of geopolitical mess, over 4 to 5 decades, they were able to develop this cooperative ecosystem known as the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. So a little bit here about the history of the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation, or the MCC. It starts with a radical priest. His name is Father Arizmendi de Arrieta, and that is a mouthful, right? Even for people who speak Spanish. So most people refer to him as Arizmendi, or Arizmendi for short. It comes to Mondragon in 1941 at the age of 25 years old. And by the way, the Basque region, this is in the context, there was a war in Spain, a civil war from 1936 to 1939, and the Basques were on the losing side. And this priest was imprisoned with other priests in the Basque region, 6 or 7, I think, to be exact. And he's the only one who survived. The winners, the Franco regime in Spain, murdered the rest of them. So it's kind of a miracle that he made it out of this. But he comes to Mondragon in 1941. Essentially, at that point in the Basque country, there is no economy. It had pretty much been bombed, off the face of the map economically. And Arismendi wants to build an economy that is based on a Catholic encyclical titled Rerum Novarum. And that encyclical was written by Pope Leo, I think, the 13th in 1891. That translates to basically the rights and duties of capital and labor. So that work really was a critique of both communism and capitalism, especially industrial capitalism, as it existed at that time. And it's really the foundation of Arismendi's work in building the co-op economy. The focus was on human dignity and solidarity, and I have work here, but really it's about the dignity of work, how we can promote human dignity through work. In 1943, he founded Escuela Profesional, which is the first school, right? And that school was a co-op, and today that school is Mondragon University, which is also a cooperative and part of the MCC network. So in 1956, the first industrial co-op was launched, Olgor. Today it still exists. It's called Fagor, and it was started with 5 members, and they made kerosene heaters basically for the Basque region there. And it's important to realize that these are engineers, but part of their schooling was also very much grounded in cooperative-based economics, through the teaching of Rerum Novarum and Catholic social teaching. It's interesting to note today that Spain is very much very secular, right? People there don't really care much about Catholicism anymore, the majority of the population, and they've kind of forgotten the roots of this, even though they carry on, the principles of cooperative economics. So we move up to today in 2023, and the MCC consists of, trying to move these things around here. The MCC consists of 86 co-ops, employing about 70,000 people. Interesting to note, there are only 60 executives. So when they talk about giving workers power, they mean it, right? It's not top heavy with administrative folks at all. The MCC is the 10th largest corporation in Spain. They turn over a 10 million euro annual profit. And the Basque country has the lowest inequality and poverty rate in all of Europe. And probably, for that matter, in most of the world, less than 1% of the population in the Basque region is below the poverty line. Another thing that a lot of people might not know is that there are around 2,500 co-ops in the Basque country that are not part of the MCC network. So this is really a co-op culture. Most of those 2,500 co-ops are relatively small, whereas when you think about some of the MCC co-ops, some of these industrial co-ops are massive industries that employ thousands of people. That being said, those other 2,500 co-ops do work with and learn from the Mondragon co-ops, right? So even though they're not part of that network, they work together as part of an effort to build a cooperative regional economy. So when we think about the types of co-ops that exist within the system, most of them are industrial co-ops. They produce things like transmissions for BMW. They produce high-end level bicycles, a co-op called Orbea. If you ever watch the Tour de France, you'll see cyclists riding that brand, right? They produce firearms, right? There's a company called Vergara. And if you're a hunter or know anyone who, let's say, deer hunts or goes elk hunting, they make very high quality hunting rifles. There's a credit co-op, a consumer co-op, 3 agricultural co-ops, 8 educational co-ops, one of which is Mondragon University. Most of the other educational co-ops are K through 12 schools. Most of the people who live in Mondragon, their kids go to those co-op schools that are part of the MCC network. There are service co-ops and there are R&D co-ops. The biggest of the R&D co-ops is Ikerlan. They do very applied research, and all of their research is basically focused on helping to grow cooperative businesses. So you might have a business, one of the industrial co-ops that has an idea for a particular product. They go to Ikerlan and they say, hey, we need some applied research on this product. Will it work, right? How can we make it better? How can we make this product better than competitive companies that are making the product? And I should say, competitive companies, I mean companies outside of the MCC system. Co-ops within the MCC system, as part of their rules, you might say, do not compete with one another, and they don't develop competitive products. And that's part of the, the idea that all of these co-ops are interdependent. It's an interdependent ecosystem, and every decision that is made is not only for the development of the growth of a particular co-op, an individual co-op, but the system as a whole, right? So that's always taken into account. A couple of stats here, one in particular that completely blew me away. Profits, 60% of the profit from all of the co-ops go back into R&D. And that is really about building, maintaining and building a future of competitiveness and staying, ahead of competitors and maintaining innovation. 10% of the profits go into community development, and the individual co-ops decide however they want to do that. It might be building a playground, a soccer pitch, a walking trail that focuses on giving disabled people access to walking activities. I mean, you name it, and they have done it. And these are part of, the co-ops don't just decide to do this on their own this year, that year, because they're feeling benevolent about community development. All of this is built into the structure, the rules, the regulations of the MCC system, and they all must adhere to this. So most people who know anything about co-ops, they know about the principles of co-ops. The International Cooperative Alliance adheres to 7 principles. The ICA, did I get that right, Hannah? The ICA, right? There's 7 principles. The Mondragon, the MCC system expands that a little bit to 10. All of these principles are critically important for maintaining the integrity of the cooperative ecosystem. But I've highlighted 3 here that I think are very important to Mondragon. And they're in blue. So you can see the first I have highlighted here is intercooperation. And really, this is a mechanism for solidarity between cooperatives, both for businesses and individuals. So for example, let's say you work for a cooperative, and for whatever reason, that cooperative is facing economic challenges, and some of the people there might be in a position where they're going to get laid off, lose their job. Well, as a worker within that co-op, and the co-op is a member of the MCC system, you have the right to transfer to another co-op if your skills apply there. If that doesn't work, you have the right to be reskilled or retrained. All of this is paid for by the MCC system. And if you still don't have a job, At that point, you are guaranteed unemployment payment for 2 years by the MCC system. There has never been a case within the history of Mondragon where somebody has been on unemployment for 2 years. In effect, working for the MCC system is almost like, I have to be careful here, a guarantee for lifetime employment within the system. And that is very unique, when you compare that to our model of capitalism here that we operate under within the United States. The other one is social transformation. They're committed to sustainable development, supportive, sustainable development on a regional scale. And a lot of this has to do, I'll talk more about this in a few minutes, with the role of the credit union. And it has to do with the entrepreneurial division of the credit union, which most credit unions within the United States, the entrepreneurial division does not exist. And I'll emphasize that here in a few minutes. Very important to Mondragon is education. Education. The Basque Country is a co-op culture. And when kids grow up in the Basque Country, when they learn economics, they learn cooperative economics. And when you get out of school, let's say you go to university, you think you might want to start a business. Most of the time, the first type of business that people would think about starting is a co-op. Give an example of how that works at Mondragon University. My friend and colleague, Fred Freierlook, he is a professor of business and economics at Mondragon University. And their program there looks nothing like a B&E program you would see at a university in the United States. The entire program is applied, and it's about learning cooperative economics. And the students within that major, in order to graduate with a degree, actually have to create a co-op, a real, live, existing, profitable co-op. Some of those co-ops have ended up being part of the MCC system. Some have not. So interesting little tidbit there. Okay, let's see here. So what are, when I think about some of the lessons here, and I think I have 3 outlined, some of the lessons from my experience in Mondragon. The first is patience and perseverance. So when we go back to the beginning, Arizmendi in 1941 comes to Mondragon, the town of Mondragon, and he is dedicated to building the economy and building a cooperative economy. And in many ways, he did what I have been doing over the past 5-6 years with the folks at Ohio State through and Hannah, right, and Sam, through the Appalachia Cooperates Initiative. He was out in the field. He was selling the idea of cooperative economics. At that time, very much based on Catholic social teaching, because it was a very sort of Catholic culture at that point. But again and again and again, for the better part of a decade, he was denied. All of the existing companies over that 10-year period pretty much denied Arizmendi's request to implement shared governance within their businesses. And, so he was in a situation where, yes, he's in the field, he's preaching, he's talking about the cooperative culture, he's talking about economic democracy and economic justice and issues of equity, and everybody agrees, but there's really no collective action, no action no action that was sort of at the ground level put into place to build that cooperative economy. So in 1957, he has 5 graduates, as I mentioned earlier, from Escuela Profesional, which is now Mondragon University. These are the engineers that create Orgor, that create the first industrial co-op. They had an absolute nightmare acquiring finance capital for the co-ops. This was a situation in post-Civil War Spain where everything, it should be said that from 1939 to 1975, Spain was a dictatorship under President Franco. And believe me, because the Basques were the losers, Madrid was doing nothing to help the Basque region. Arizmendi would go to Madrid to plead and beg for economic development funds, loans, and the answer was no, 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 no. So finance capital, acquiring finance capital became really the focus of Arizmendi's efforts to build the cooperative regional economy. And he said, okay, we're going to have to create a bank. And the bank that was created in 1959 at that time was called Caja Laboral. And that bank was a credit union. And basically, the initial people involved in Orgor put their own capital into creating this credit union. And today it's called Laboral Custa. That's one of those Basque words that's nearly impossible to pronounce, as it seems like all of them are. But the important thing here in 1959, and this is something that I really took away from this experience, and I think we really need to work toward here within the United States, is that Caja Laboral, Laboral Cuxta, this credit union, has an entrepreneurial division. And I'll say a little bit more about this here on the next slide. So the next lesson, when I think about my experience there in Mondragon and thinking about how to apply this, I'm speaking here within the Appalachian context, but I think this is really necessary for co-ops within the United States, nationwide. We need a bank. And we need a bank. Perhaps we need a collection of regional banks. When I say bank, I mean credit union. And I would like to very much see credit unions formed, let's say, within the Appalachian region that are based on the Caja Laboral model, because it is not your average credit union. It is a credit union that gives favored status to the MCC co-ops and to creating co-ops. So their mission is, it's not just about loaning money, and it's not just about having a credit union where you have members. Caja Laboral, by the way, is both an employee-owned co-op and a member-owned co-op, unlike credit unions here in the United States. So there are three divisions of Laboral Cuxta. The first is the financial division, and that's just like credit unions here in the United States. That's all about the money, right? You have to have the capital to loan, to operate as a bank or a credit union. The second division is what they call the social division, but it's more about education. It's devoted to teaching the cooperative model, primarily through the credit union banking system and how that works. So that's very much the educational component of this credit union. And then last but not least, which I've highlighted here, is the entrepreneurial division. And the entrepreneurial division is absolutely key, because the goal of the entrepreneurial division is to create new co-ops. Literally, Laboral Cuxta will say on an annual basis, for example, and this depends on a number of factors, how profitable has the MCC been the last year? How much surplus capital do they have? They will literally say, okay, our goal this year is to create 10 new worker-owned co-ops, or 5 new worker-owned co-ops as part of the MCC system. So that is absolutely critical when it comes to building a cooperative regional economy. And it should be said, when we think about the MCC and how it operates, the primary goal of the MCC is job creation. It's not wealth creation. It's creating jobs that reinforce human dignity and the value of the human through the work that they do, all types of work, whether you're a janitor or an executive. And the focus is on job creation that that brings fair pay, if you will, fair pay. The primary goal is not wealth creation. Now, by default, when you create jobs that pay you might say, a middle-class living wage, the net result is region-wide wealth creation. The net result is the creation of an economy that is economically, and you might say socioeconomically resilient, more successful than most regional economies, and more economically resilient than most regional economies. So the entrepreneurial division is necessary for what people in the Basque region call entrepreneurial regional socioeconomic transformation. Now, what does this mean? It means that, part of the goal of the MCC and that entrepreneurial division within the credit union is to transform the system, to create socioeconomic transformation on a regional scale, where there is more equity and less poverty, and more job creation and more economic resilience. All of it built on the 10 principles, the 10 cooperative principles of Mondragon. And so for me, as I learned about this over the week in Mondragon, and I heard this reinforced again and again and again, no matter what co-op I visited, we visited multiple co-ops within the MCC system and heard from all sorts of people, administrators, worker owners, people within the community. They focused again and again and again on how they couldn't do it as a co-op, and they couldn't do it as a region without Caja Labara or Labara Cuxta. So I would argue that Appalachia as a region, we need a Caja Laboral. We need a co-op based on this model in order to create a cooperative-based regional economy, because this system we have, the existing system, is not supportive in the way that we need it to be to build a regional economy. Another thing I learned, a lot of people, I was on, this trip involved, I think there were 25 people in the program I was involved in. Wide swath of folks. We had many people from the Philippines that work in the insurance cooperative sector. The rest were Americans, but a lot of people, and I'd been to the Basque region before, so I did not have this sense, but a lot of people go to the Basque region and they think, oh wow, this place is, it's a panacea. These people must have special genetics, to be able to build something like this. And the coordinator, or the director of our program on site there, you might say the tour, the seminar guide, and there, he kept saying to me, we are normal people. We are normal people. And what he meant in saying this was that, there's nothing unique about Basque culture that determines the success of the MCC. He went on to tell me many, many times, and we learned this throughout the week, the MCC is a dynamic and evolving co-op system. It's not perfect. There are a few examples of co-ops within the system failing. Not many, but one in particular was a very big industrial co-op that did fail just right after the 2008 economic crisis. And there are examples of MCC, co-ops within the MCC system leaving the network. This is rare, but it has happened. And it's happened because of certain dysfunctions within the MCC system, if you will. So I think it's also important to realize that, we, on the outside, we have this idea of one worker, one vote. And yes, it is one worker, one vote. But when you really get granular about it and get into the nitty-gritty, you see that a relatively small percentage of worker owners, of those 70,000 worker owners, are super deeply engaged in the democratic decision-making process. There are 650 members within the MCC system. They are worker employees, worker owners that make up the General Assembly. The General Assembly meets on an annual basis, and the General Assembly, those 650 members, they make a lot of the very, very important decisions on an annual basis. So I think that's important for us to realize, because in order to create, one of the things I came away with is that in order to create a system like this and have a sustaining system like this, you don't need 70,000 people that are part of a network of cooperatives within an ecosystem like this to live, eat, breathe co-ops 24/7. Many of the people within this 70,000 employee system, yes, they are worker owners, but they are followers. They are not leaders within the system. And I think that's important for us to realize. Many of the cooperatives that we visited, you go into these co-ops, you go to these large industrial co-ops, and the first thing they want to start talking about are the products that they produce and how competitive they're going to be next year with these products, and why their goal is to dominate the market, which is what you would hear at a traditional corporation within the United States. And you have to remind them that you're there to say, well, that's fantastic, but we're really here to talk about co-ops. And I found that to be very, very interesting. So the MCC can happen anywhere, really. There are people who are passionate about workplace democracy. It does take some really passionate people who want to live the co-op model, at least for a while, like Arizmendi. But it's the model, and when I say model, I'm not saying necessarily the replication, the exact replication of the Mondragon model, but this type of model is possible anywhere. It's not unique to Basque culture in any way, shape, or form. What is important, I think, and gives regions a greater chance to develop a cooperative ecosystem like Mondragon, are regions that have been systematically underdeveloped by the current form of capitalism. And these are places like Appalachia. So the underdevelopment of Appalachia, even though our underdevelopment is not a result of civil war, is similar in many ways to the underdevelopment of the Basque region of northern Spain. And so it's out of these periods of economic crisis and poverty and underdevelopment, I think, that people are more open to alternative alternative models. So I'm going to give a plug here. There's a new book out. My friend Michael Peck is one of the editors of this book, and he worked with many, many people at Mondragon to produce this book, Humanity at Work and Life, Global Diffusion of the Mondragon Cooperative Experience, the Ecosystem Experience. This is a fantastic book. If you want to learn anything else about Mondragon, how it works, how it operates, its successes, its challenges. So that is one reference point there, source that is really, really good, excellent for information on Mondragon. And then I'm going to end here. You're going to meet my friend Ander from Mondragon, who was our guide while I was there. Mondragon has put together a series of 24 short videos explaining, talking about the Mondragon experience. And there's a link to it here. Let's see if this works. We'll click on it. Hopefully it does open. Everything you need to know about Mondragon from the people of Mondragon. So here's the, I'll just finish off here with the trailer. You can have access to everything you need about these videos on the site. And this, by the way, is Ander. And we'll just hear what it is.
It was said to be impossible, but we did it. And we continue doing it. Mondragon is a challenge to conventional ways of understanding business. It is the largest group of worker cooperatives in the world, with businesses in a number of different fields. We are around 70,000 workers in more than 80 cooperatives and plants around the world, selling products and services in more than 150 countries, with an annual turnover of over 10,000 million euros. We are committed to creating transformative and prosperous fields with intercooperation, sustainability, and digital transformation as a strategic axis for the coming years. In this series, you will discover the cooperative experience, Mondragon as explained by the people of Mondragon.
Okay, so with that, I'm finished. Wrap it up and open any ideas and thoughts and chat that folks might want to have.
Thank you very much, Todd, for your presentation. It definitely, I had to keep myself from asking you how your trip was, because I knew this is what the whole presentation was going to be about when we first started. So does anybody have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself if you feel comfortable.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to share, I can moderate questions from the chat, and then it looks like maybe we have a couple folks who are comfortable unmuting and sharing their questions. So I'll share David's question from the chat, and then maybe we'll jump into live questions too. So David was saying that they had heard that employees working for MCC in other parts of the world are not able to become members of MCC. That's actually, I think, something that I've heard as well in some of the work I've taken in about MCC. Todd, did you learn anything about that, or maybe have resources that might be able to help us understand that further?
Yes, when I was in Mondragon, this is a point of discussion and a point of contention. Many of the co-ops within the MCC have subsidiaries in other parts of the world. Brazil is one spot, China another spot. And in most of those subsidiaries, not all, but most, they are not worker owners. They are not members of the MCC. And the most I can say about it, the most of what I learned is that yes, they recognize that given the model, the 10 principles that the MCC operates under, this is problematic. And it's an ongoing point of discussion as to how they remedy this, what percentage of the business they do, for example, should be farmed out to these subsidiaries. That is a really big point of discussion. So yeah, it's a very good point, and it's part of the, the imperfectness of the system.
Yeah, I think interesting, Todd, to help us remember that Mondragon is a premier example, but that doesn't mean it's perfect, right? So lots to learn. I saw a couple folks come onto video and unmute. I'm gonna ask if Carl is first on my screen. Carl, did you have a question you wanted to share?
I just had an additional comment.
Sure.
When I was in Mondragon, one of the leaders there, organizers, was talked about this foreign country question. He gave an interesting example of Mexico. They set up a auto parts factory there, and they got it all set up and everything. There were 100 or so workers. Then the guy from Mondragon came and gave them the whole pitch, sort of like you heard here, and one worker, one vote, on and on and on. And when he finishes his speech, there was dead silence. And finally, one worker put up his hand and said, "What's the trick?" In other words, they didn't believe it. It was too good to be true. They thought they were being tricked somehow. So the lesson there is every country has a different culture, and not only a different culture about these things, but also they have different laws. The cooperative laws in some Latin American countries, for example, are extremely difficult. Here in the U.S., they're not so easy either, but you have to, you almost have to translate the cooperative model according to the laws in different countries. But in this case, it was a question of the culture. The workers there had no sense of their, to them going to factory meant you had a jefe, a chief, you did what you were told, you got your check, and if anything, you had to have a union to fight. But the idea, that they couldn't believe it. So that there's an educational aspect to the whole problem. So anyway.
Thanks for sharing, Carl. Appreciate that. And I just wanted to offer Todd, whether you have anything to share based on your experience.
Yeah, Carl, that's a very good point. And I heard that story too when I was in Mondragon. And the workers in that factory opted not to vote to become part of the MCC. I think what you're saying there is it's real. The sale, if you will, the sale of the co-op model has to be based on particular histories, and cultural values and ideas. And, I grew up in West Virginia, my family were coal miners there. And Hannah and I have discussed this before, there is a history of distrust in regions like Appalachia, particularly West Virginia, that have been systematically marginalized and exploited. And for many people who live up those hollers, their question also is, what's the trick? What's the trick? Where is the trick in this model? So yeah, I think that's a very good point.
And I do just want to point out, David is sharing with us, rightfully so, that there are many co-ops in other places, including Mexico, and we can't paint with a broad brush, right? And there are nuances, of course, to all of this conversation. So we just want to recognize that and
right, absolutely
respecting that too. So
yeah, lots of good coffee co-ops in Chiapas.
So I think lots of opportunities to think about how Mondragon, for example, incorporated education, right, systematically into the work that they do and what that looks like. So I see Libby there's a hand up. Libby, if you're able to unmute.
Oh, Michael had his hand up before. So
thank you so much, Michael. Good to see you again.
Yeah, yes, and good to see Todd again. We tried to do some things in West Virginia together. The person who was really the linchpin, a Catholic priest, unfortunately passed away, and the effort kind of dissolved from that. But so I'm familiar with some of the things. And one interesting point is that when Mondragon started, it was a 3-to-1 ratio. It's now a 9-to-1 ratio on wages, which I know they've had trouble keeping high-end professional services like doctors. You just can't, they've had to do, I imagine, do that to compete. But my question is really a follow-up to what was discussed before is, how do you, or what was the situation? I mean, is the history of the place, what was the history of Mondragon like, or what was there before the Civil War? I mean, we know that what's the situation in Appalachia, where we've got the people up the holler, where many of these people are one or two, or may only be a generation or so removed from basically a company town culture where you had your job and you went to it, and that's what was expected. We found, in my time here, I've been at WVU almost 3 decades, and it's been an issue where, I mean, we try to do entrepreneur training, and it's just not in people's quote unquote DNA to do that. What was the situation like in Mondragon? I mean, I don't remember when I studied it in my graduate studies, but that was too long ago to count. Remember rather. What was it? I mean, was it something that people related to, or something? Did they have that entrepreneurial spirit, or is that part of that education? Because one thing, as you noted, it took time and time and time and time and time. And we're looking, 70 years after some of the initial efforts started to click, and it took 15 years. This is not something that even if you started today might show its fruits in our work lifetimes.
Yeah. Good question. I mean, prior to Mondragon, Spanish Civil War, the Basque Country was mostly agricultural, but with also some mineral extraction. Not to the scale of coal in West Virginia, but yeah, that's a good question, Mike. I've thought about that quite a bit, and I did hear folks saying, when I was in Mondragon, that prior to Arizmendi, there was not, it wasn't a region of sort of hyper entrepreneurial spirit, right? People worked in some of the existing factories there, mineral extraction, and lots of farming. And that, to me, wow, that sounds a lot like West Virginia. So then the question once again becomes, and I've thought about this a lot too, Mike, so a great point to bring up, how do you bring Central Appalachia? Where's the tipping point? Where do you get to a point to where people switch from thinking about their potential as working for, a corporation that's going to locate a factory, a Toyota plant in West Virginia, versus people thinking about how to build an entirely new entrepreneurial ecosystem? And I think that's the $1 million question.
So I wanted to mention, Todd, to your point about co-op friendly capital. The great folks at the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives have a national cooperative resource ecosystem map and tool. And I just shared the link in the chat, and co-op friendly capital is a part of that tool. So take a look there. Libby, thanks for your patience, and good to see you again.
Yeah. So everybody else's comments, I'm glad I let you go first, because I was just going to say the exact same things. I think a lot about like the culture question, and the question of like, where's individualism versus collectivism here? Like, and I feel like a lot of Appalachia is like extremely individualistic. And co-ops kind of require you to learn how to collaborate with other people, with a large group of other people. And I feel like we aren't prepared to do that culturally, not by school or by our previous work experiences. And I think the thing that when I talk to people about co-ops, the thing that's always on people's mind is like, how do it seems like people worry about trusting others that much, because like it just requires such a huge degree of trust. And like you said, like the history of coming from West Virginia too, West Virginia is like exploitation and I think part of the thing with Mexico, we're like, oh, there are co-ops in Mexico though. Thing with Mondragon is it's coming from outside, right? It's coming from a place like literally a country that colonized Mexico. And they're like, oh, we're going to bring you this great thing. It's not surprising that people would be skeptical. And I think maybe that's going to be part of the key to making co-ops work in Appalachia, is making sure that they're being started, like that it's coming from within, and that we're not like trying to bring in outside people or outside like when we're talking about like growing the economy, a lot of times people are saying like, how do we get young professionals to move to West Virginia, or or big business to move to West Virginia? Like, that's not going to work for co-ops. It has to come from within, right? And I think it's a really good question. Like, how do we kind of nurture what little cooperative spirit we have so that it blooms, you know?
Yeah, yeah, thanks for the question, Libby. That's a great question. I interviewed, I was in Spain for 6+ weeks and spent more time in the Basque region than just that week. I interviewed a number of people for some research that I'm doing. And one of the fellows said to me, he said, you know, one thing you need for co-ops is cooperative people. People need to be cooperative. And I thought that was very telling. There is a professor at Mondragon University that is studying what makes one culture more cooperative versus another per se. And that work is ongoing. I think one of the products of that research is supposed to be some sort of a survey that could be administered, really kind of a universal type of survey, you know, regardless of what region you're working in. So I found that to be very interesting. To your point on individualism, one of the things that I really try to sell in Central Appalachia, especially West Virginia, right? When I talk about co-ops, is that, you know, when you talk about economic democracy and you talk about worker owners, that makes you an owner. There's something individualistic about that. In a way, all of the worker owners within a co-op that, for example, that might exist within the MCC system, it makes them all little individual capitalists, because they own and control land, labor, and capital, which in a typical, you know, capitalist system doesn't really exist. So, but yeah, good. I mean, it's a good question, and it's part of what it's part of our challenge, you know, in trying to spread the Mondragon model.